The last subsection of Standard 3 in Grade 3 fractions wants us to compare two fractions, either with the same numerator or with the same denominator. So let's first, we talked about unit fractions. Let's first compare 1 over 2, 1 over 3, 1 over 4, and 1 over 5, etc. So clearly the numerator is the same in this case. And let's make it clear we're referring to the same whole. Let's let that whole represent the area of the unit square. Now it should be clear to us that these fractions successively decrease in size. Let's try to make it more accurate. They successively decrease in size because the whole is partitioned into more and more parts, and one of those parts will be smaller. So here's 1/2, here's a third, here's a fourth, and here's a fifth. Here's a fifth, here's a fourth, here's a third, and here's a half. So visually we can see that they get smaller, but it should also make conceptual sense. So we can say that, in terms of ordering it, we can say that 1/2 is greater than 1/3, which is greater than 1/4, which is greater than 1/5. Now let's look at the case where the denominators are the same. Let's compare 3/5 to 6/5. Now it should be clear that 6/5 is greater than 3/5 because 3 copies. We remember this is 3 copies of 1 over 5, and this is 6 copies of 1 over 5. So you can also picture it on the number line. It would be further along, therefore greater. So if the denominator is the same, all we have to do is look at the numerator to see which fraction is greater. Let's look at one last case of equivalent numerators. Let's look at 2/5 or 2/7. How can we reason which one would be greater? Well, let's look at the interpretation. This is 2 copies of 1 over 5, and this is 2 copies of 1 over 7. Well, we know 1 over 5 is greater than 1 over 7, so it follows that 2 copies of that will be greater than 2 copies of 1 over 7. As a simple conceptual model, let's represent a copy of 1 over 7 as this. Let's exaggerate the point here. And a copy of 1 over 5 is this, right? Because we know that 1 over 5 is greater than 1 over 7, right? We're just exaggerating the point here. Therefore, 2 copies would clearly be greater than 2 copies of something that's smaller. And the last point I want to make very clear is we have to refer to the same unambiguous whole, because as a clear example, 1/3 could really be greater than 1/2 if they're not referring to the same whole. Just look at this picture right here. Let's represent, here is 1/3, and let's represent, here is a really small half. So clearly, because they're not referring to the same whole, 1/3 is clearly greater than 1/2. So if they refer to the same whole, 1/2 would be greater. And as a simple example, 1/3 of 800 is greater than 1/2 of 4, because this whole is much, much, much smaller than this whole, so we must refer to the same unambiguous whole.